Hello, my name is Janae Savoy. I'm in Q23 and this is my presentation regarding regression analysis for BMGT 438A. So the data set that I looked at evaluated different factors that could potentially influence the presence of low birth weight in babies, which is defined as any birth weight less than 2,500 grams. So the data itself included 189 observations, 59 of which relate to low birth weight babies and their mothers, and 130 of which relate to normal birth weight babies and their mothers. So data on 11 variables were collected. 3 of these were the identification code, whether or not the baby was born with a low birth weight, and the birth weight in grams. In addition to these, information on 8 potential predictors were evaluated, including the age of the mother, the weight at the last menstrual cycle in pounds, the smoking status during pregnancy, the history of hypertension, race, history of premature labor, presence of uterine irritability, and the number of physician visits during the first trimester. So based on my data, I decided to go with a research question that is, what factors influence the presence of low birth weight in babies? When I first looked at this data, I didn't want to use all 8 predictors because this is my first time running regression in R, so I decided to narrow it down to 4. So this is a screenshot of the data that I imported into R. The first column, which is designated as low, is the variable that talks about whether or not a baby was born with a low birth weight. So the presence of a 0 as the value for this means that the baby was not born with a low birth weight, and the presence of a 1 means that the baby was born with a low birth weight. I chose to use 2 continuous variables, age and the weight of the mother at the last menstrual cycle, and 2 categorical variables, so smoking status during pregnancy and hypertension. For this data, using a logistic regression is the most appropriate because the dependent variable is dichotomous, meaning there's only 2 possible outcomes. So I ran the logistic regression in R, and this is the output that I got. It includes information about deviance residuals, coefficients, null and residual deviances, and the number of Fisher scoring iterations. After I ran my logistic regression, I wanted to evaluate the model as a whole and see how the incorporation of all 4 predictor values impact the predictability of whether or not a baby will be born with a low birth weight. So to do this, you evaluate based on these 2 hypotheses. So the null hypothesis states that the model is not better than chance at predicting whether or not a baby will be born with a low birth weight, and the alternative says that the model is better than chance at predicting whether or not a baby will be born with a low birth weight. So to look at both of these hypotheses, you have to calculate a model chi-square statistic as well as the p-value that's associated with it. So to calculate the model chi-square statistic itself, you do the null deviance minus the residual deviance. And in this case, our model chi-square statistic is 18.98766. Then you have to calculate the degrees of freedom that was going to be needed to calculate the p-value, which is just the degrees of freedom for the null minus the degrees of freedom for the residual, which is 4. Then to get the p-value, you do 1 minus the probability that's outputted when you input our model chi-square statistic and the degrees of freedom. In this case, our p-value is 0.00079, which is lower than the standard level of significance of 5%, which means that we reject the null hypothesis. Therefore, we can conclude that the model is better than chance at predicting whether or not a baby will be born with a low birth weight. After looking at the model as a whole, I wanted to look at each individual coefficient. So this is a screenshot of the information given by the logistic regression regarding all 4 of our predictor variables. So to interpret the estimate for age, you would say that for every 1 unit change in age, the log odds of a baby being born with a low birth weight decreases by 0.03567. The p-value for this predictor is 0.28480, which is greater than our level of significance of 0.05. So we can conclude that age isn't really a significant predictor of the presence of a low birth weight in the baby. Next, we have the weight of the mother at the last menstrual cycle, which can be interpreted as for every 1 unit change in the weight of the mother at the last menstrual cycle, the log odds of a baby being born with a low birth weight decreases by 0.016955. The p-value for this predictor is 0.01047, which is less than our level of significance of 0.05, which means that the weight of the mother at the last menstrual cycle is a significant predictor of the presence of a low birth weight in the baby. Next, we have the smoking status during pregnancy, which can be interpreted as having a value of 1 for smoking status when compared with having a value of 0 changes the log odds of a baby being born with a low birth weight by 0.679020. This predictive variable is also significant because it has a p-value of 0.04079, which is less than 0.05. Finally, we have hypertension. So having a value of 1 as compared to a value of 0 for the presence of hypertension, changes the log odds of a baby being born with a low birth weight by 1.788156. This predictor has the lowest p-value with 0.00913, which means that this predictive variable is also significant when predicting whether or not there's going to be a low birth weight in a baby. So to tie up all that we have just discussed, we have 2 conclusions. So based on the low p-value related to the model chi-square statistic, we can conclude that the overall model that includes all 4 predictors, age of the mother, presence of hypertension, weight at the last menstrual cycle, and smoking status during pregnancy, that were tested is better than chance at predicting whether or not a baby will be born with a low birth weight. In addition, after looking at each individual predictor variable, the ones that were significant in predicting whether or not a baby will be born with a low birth weight are the presence of hypertension, weight at the last menstrual cycle, and smoking status during pregnancy. Thank you for listening. Have a good evening.